your very kind words, and to Marjorie and the staff and the board of directors of Yes She Can for this honor. I feel like in some ways I'm sort of preaching to the choir, so I've taken a slightly different approach. And so what I want to do is I want to tell you about my cousin Andrea. Andrea and her parents and sisters moved to Israel about 30 years ago, so our contact has been significantly less than when we were kids. But in looking back over a career, I can't help but giving credit to my Aunt Sandra and my Uncle Gene and Andrea and her sisters as true heroes and role models. Andrea will be 60 this year and has had some significant health issues, but as a child she was spunky and fun and full of life. Andrea was short with black curly hair, which shouldn't be any big surprise. She has sparkling green eyes and a smile that seemed endless. She worked hard to do the things that required fine motor skills, like tying her shoes, but she was the friendliest person I knew, and everyone, including myself, loved Andrea. Although she and her family lived out of town even when we were kids, we got together frequently, and when we did, I remember feeling amazed that she remembered the names of all my friends. We talked about boys in our respective classrooms because I suppose we were both interested in having boyfriends. She knew every lyric to every song on the radio and the words of the blessings we sang on Friday nights. She never played an instrument, but boy did she love to sing. I have one distinct memory of a sleepover at Andrea's house when all of the cousins decided it would be a great idea to throw all the pillows on the floor and take turns jumping off the top of my cousin's bunk beds. Suffice it to say that we got into big trouble after Aunt Sandra came upstairs for the 5th or 6th or 8th, I don't know how many times, screaming at us to stop. We all held our breaths in silence until she stopped yelling at us, and then we all burst out laughing the minute she left the room. Andrea was right in the middle of our shenanigans, just part of the fun in our family. It wasn't until much later that I heard the story that is all too familiar, that my aunt and uncle were told by Andrea's doctors in 1957 or 1958 that it would be best to institutionalize her and that she wouldn't be able to do this or she wouldn't be able to do that. Because parents are so often incredibly determined and resourceful, my aunt and uncle refused to institutionalize her and have spent the last 60 years fighting for her rights and advocating for people with disabilities. They were trailblazers. As a child, I didn't understand any of this, but my Aunt Sandra and I have had many conversations and email exchanges over the years about what she thought and how she and my uncle fought, and I am forever grateful for their courage and strength. I'm going to steal a line from this fabulous movie that I've now seen several times. It happens to be called Life Animated, and it goes something like this. And I told these guys I feel like a groupie. Who gets to decide what a meaningful life is? My aunt and uncle decided that despite her developmental disability, that we later learned was part of her Williams syndrome, my cousin was entitled to a meaningful life on her terms. She had been a loyal and hardworking employee, a friend to many, and enriched the lives of her family. Even Harvard researcher Dr. George Vallant has made it very clear what many of us know intuitively, and that is that in the end, it's not wealth, it's not intelligence or fame, but rather the quality of our relationships, our love that brings people the most happiness. Andrea's love of life and the people closest to her has brought happiness to so many, and I think profound meaning to all of our lives. I don't want to sound Pollyannish. It was not always so wonderful. Like many other people with disabilities, there were enormous challenges. My aunt was a reading teacher and my uncle a book distributor. Both valued education and intellectual pursuits. Andrea was their first child, and they had to change their expectations and hopes and dreams for her. Loss and grieving for what they thought she might do was an evolving process. And I know there were times when they felt extreme loneliness and sadness and fear. In the field of psychology, there's a concept that we refer to as bearing witness. While it comes out of the trauma field, I have found it to be incredibly useful in working with individuals with developmental disabilities and their families. The idea of sharing your story does many things for both the teller of the story and the listener. It takes remarkable courage, but in retelling one story, isolation is reduced and healing can start. For the story hearer, and that's been me for almost 40 years, it's a chance to bear witness to something that gives meaning to a fellow human, because it means listening well without judgment, and in doing so offers dignity and value to the story and the person. So this has been the basis of my advocacy work, listening well, hearing what's important and looking for ways to push and negotiate and educate and cajole, and really just never giving up. I have the advantage of age at this point, and it has become so clear that sometimes it just has to be the right time and the right place for a new idea to move forward. I've had the good fortune of learning from and working with many of you in this room. And in partnership with like-minded people, we have moved ideas and resources forward. I'm grateful to the Allisons of the world who research and guide evidence-based treatment interventions, and the creative people like Marjorie and Steve, and the Pats in the room, and Bill and Janet, and all whom have built much-needed programs for people with autism and other developmental disabilities. And I am indebted to so many individuals with disabilities, the Joes of the world and their families, who have shared their stories with me and inspired me to keep learning, to keep trying, and together to keep pushing up the mountain for better services and better outcomes. I have made more phone calls, written more letters and emails to lawmakers in the last year than all of my previous 50-something years combined. And although there has been a tiny reprieve, I also believe there is much at stake between threats to the IDEA, the environmental protections, and Medicaid spending that supports the services needed to help people with autism live as independently as possible. We need to make sure our voices are heard. None of us can sit back and expect that someone else is going to make those phone calls. Now, folks, is the time to be involved. As many of you know, I've recently retired from my position at Westchester County DCMH, but as Mark suggested, we're still in contact. Before I left, and with some of my colleagues, I was able to set up an internship for a young man who was looking for a part-time clerical work experience while attending Purchase College. He is 20-ish, diagnosed on the spectrum, and by social standards a bit nerdy, and yet one of the nicest guys you could meet. After some initial planning to set up an experience we hoped would be successful, I can tell you that it has been an incredibly wonderful match. Sam has gone through dozens of drawers, packed drawers, pulling older files for archiving and alphabetizing the newer files with precision and accuracy. His attention to detail and his pride in getting through a tedious process has been a win-win for DCMH. Yes, there were a few issues we had to work out, and he got stuck on some of the details that were not meaningful in the job that needed to get done. But with a little bit of support, he was able to move on. Perhaps paid employment at the county is in his future. Who knows? Westchester County would be lucky to have him. It is our work as advocates to push the policies, to provide the education, and to help shift a culture. As part of the DD unit, Sam attended our holiday luncheon at my house, and he later invited several of us to his cheese and puzzle party around New Year's. He put effort into what kind of cheese he served and which puzzles he offered to work on with a dozen or so young people who came to the party. Sure, it's not what we would expect of a New Year's party, but who decides what is meaningful? I was happy to be there, and he was thrilled to have hosted such an enjoyable social event. Let's not lose the point that Sam's life experiences have been enhanced by the advocacy work of so many of you, pushing for people with autism to have college experiences as well as employment experiences. So whether it's for one person at a time or for the development or access to a service or a resource for larger groups of people, together in partnership and in celebrating our diversity, we need to continue our advocacy work. There is still so much to be done. It's been a satisfying career filled with tremendous joy and sense of accomplishment, as well as challenges and at times, frankly, heartbreak. My husband has been my rock, unbeknownst to them. And lots of dinner interruptions and got to take this call. Our children have often helped to renew my spirit, and our friends a great source of strength. And for that, I am forever grateful. Thank you.